And our next presenter is an internationally known and recognized expert in sports law and arbitration. He has spent his career working at the highest levels to protect the integrity of sports at both the amateur and the professional level. He has arbitrated key sports cases around the world, including cases involving the National Hockey League, professional tennis and golf, the Court Arbitration for Sport located in Lausanne, and as the president of the European Basketball Arbitral Tribunal. Just to name a few, the gentleman has a resume. Appointed as an independent commissioner by the World Anti-Doping Agency, and this was a big, big case. He recently examined the systematic doping and corruption in Russian athletes and subsequently led to the investigation into the allegations of sample tampering in the 2014 Sochi Winter Olympics. So please join me in welcoming a very interesting and accomplished gentleman, Professor Richard McLaren. Yeah, I'm glad you're around you're not around to take some of my blood samples. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everybody, and thank you very much for that very kind introduction. I'm going to give you a quick overview of the outline of my program. What I'd like to do is touch on what was called the Independent Commission. I was one of 3 commissioners appointed by the World Anti-Doping Agency, and I'll give you a quick summary of the Independent Commission's report and the reactions to it, and then my own report as the independent person, meaning it was just me, not the 3 of us. I'm going to touch on the findings, and then what I want to spend a little more time on is the lessons learned from my investigation and how they might have an application to the horse racing industry. So leading up to the IP was, first of all, the Independent Commission. The 2 people on the bottom right of the screen are the Stepanovas, and they are whistleblowers. I'll have a little bit more to say about them in a few minutes. She's a Russian 800-meter sprinter, and that's her at the top picture. And the other person, the man, is the producer for a documentary made in Germany by their national broadcasting company, ARD. And on the 3rd of December of 2014, they produced this program, Top Secret Doping, How Russia Makes Its Winners. And what that program did created a furor in the sporting world, which led to the appointment of the Independent Commission. That's the 3 of us sitting in the Independent Commission, the top picture there. And the IC did a report in November and a follow-up in January of 2016. Now, the findings of that commission focused primarily on what I would describe as the old doping system. What was going on in Russia was medical doctors advising coaches and trainers who then required athletes to be on doping programs designed by medical doctors. And there was complete manipulation of the doping control system, and the cheating and corruption was rampant. And when the cheating didn't work effectively, then they engaged in bribing either people within the Russian Sports Federation in track and field, or the lab itself, or when they needed to, the International Sporting Federation in track and field. And that was the subject of the second report in January 2016 of the IC. From the IC, we move on to myself as the independent person. And I was appointed to investigate and conduct an unbiased and independent examination of the evidence and make a report. I had to build on what the IC had done, and what I did provided a deeper and more complete understanding of the state-directed corruption system that was operating in Russia. I got started on this work just about a year ago today from an article that was in the New York Times last year in May, and which the former director of the Moscow and Sochi labs had put a story in through a very good journalist in the New York Times about what was going on at Sochi. And the essence of that was that athletes would be competing dirty. They would provide samples at the Winter Olympic Games, and knowing that when the sample got to the lab, which was on site, there was a clean urine bank secretly stored elsewhere. Samples would be swapped. I won't go into all of the technical details that are in the report. And of course, this swapped clean sample goes through the analytical process in the lab, no problem. And there were no Russian positives at the Sochi Games. What occurred because of that was, I think, one of the biggest sporting frauds that's probably ever been known in sport. And when this article came out, there was a huge uproar about what was in it. So I was appointed to become the independent person. And my role was to investigate whether there was manipulation of the doping control process, and if there was, how did it operate? In two labs, the Moscow lab, which is the one that was always operating in Russia, and then the Sochi lab, which was only operating in connection with the Olympic Games, Winter Olympics. And then the third part, and the part that's caused some problems at the moment, and I'll talk about them in a few minutes, was to identify athletes who are in the system. Not for the purposes of trying to identify them and establish whether or not they had committed doping violations, but to the extent that they were involved in the system, however that might be, and with whatever information that I had, I was to name them and report to them, report them in a report. So let me turn to the findings of my commission. And I ended up having to bifurcate the process because the mandate was too big for the time frame that I had, because I started in May of last year and I had to report by the 18th of July of 2016 because the Rio Games were upcoming. So I focused on the first two mandates. Was there a manipulation system? How was it operating? Left the athlete parts aside and reported on them in what I'll call the second report, which I'll come to in a moment. So what did I find? Well, first, there was no doubt in my mind, and the evidence establishes it, and it was what we called the disappearing positive methodology. But what was happening in the Moscow lab was when a sample came in, certain athletes would be known and they would have this happen automatically. Others would have to have instructions from the Ministry of Sport before this would occur. But in the initial testing procedure, if it indicated that there was likely a prohibited substance in the sample, then instructions were obtained through the Ministry of Sport in a complicated series of steps. Ultimately, the lab would be instructed, proceed with the analysis as you would with any sample, or no, they use the word save to use this instruction, which would mean that you had to corruptly misreport the test result in the World Anti-Doping System, which is called ATOMS, as being clean when it wasn't, and to manipulate as required the data within the Moscow lab. So that was a shocking early discovery. Remember, I was appointed to look primarily at what was going on in Sochi, and then I discovered that this system had been operating, and indeed it had been operating all through the period when I'd been a commissioner on the IC, because as far as I could tell from the evidence before me, which is not as extensive as one would like in these kinds of an investigation, it was operating from late 2011 right through until sometime in the summer of 2015. So that was a very important finding and report of the July report. And so what was going on here was all of those in the field systems of manipulating the doping control process. For example, telling the doping control officer to contact the athlete a couple of days before the out of competition test so that they could prepare themselves. And I'm sure many of you know that if you know that a doping test is coming up, you can fix things so that your sample will go through the analysis without a problem. So the ultimate fail-safe, if all the other things that go on in the field didn't work, was this lab system. And there was a combined conspiracy with all those different institutions within the Russian system involved one way or another in the system. And it was directed by the man, the picture is that of the Deputy Minister of Sport, a man named Nagornov, who has since been removed by the Russians from his position, but was at the time the Deputy Minister. And the ultimate fail-safe was what was going on at Sochi. In Sochi, the samples were being swapped, as I said, through a complicated procedure discussed in the report. But we also discovered in the course of doing that inquiry that there was manipulation that occurred with the Moscow 2013 championships, which was the World Championships in track and field, the London 2012 Summer Olympic Games, and other games like the University Games. So at the end of the day, when I did the second report and fulfilled the third part of the mandate and identified athletes who were involved, we found that there were over 1,000 athletes who in one way or another we could see had some role or some aspect of play in the system. And that's left sport now with the question of what do we do knowing all of the information that's come from the IC and the IP reports. And I just wanted to touch on a couple of people's reactions. The NATOs are the National Anti-Doping Organizations. And they reacted prior actually to the July report, and they wanted a blanket ban on Russian attendance at the Rio Summer Olympic Games. Many other NATOs joined the initial group, and the debate began to focus collective reaction, individual reaction. Which should it be? Should it be a combination, or how should it be dealt with? Well, the reaction of WADA, it was pretty straightforward. They don't have a sanctioning power at this point, but they have a recommendatory power. And they called on the sports movement to deny Russian athletes participation in the international competitions, including Rio, as a result of the two reports. So that would be what I would call a strong response to the investigative report. I was just providing the factual background of the investigation. I didn't have the power to make recommendations, and I didn't make any recommendations. It was up to other decision makers to decide, based on the information I provided, what they should do about it. So the sanctioning power then is up to the International Olympic Committee. And I would describe this as a very weak response. No blanket ban, contrary to WADA's recommendation to them. Pass it off to the international federations of the different sports involved. And of course, now we're talking the summer games. Sochi was the winter games, but Rio's on the scene. And they prescribed certain conditions of eligibility because they were concerned that the clean athletes, which were within Russia, and they presumed there were clean athletes, then there would be certain eligibility for them to be able to compete. The result of all of that was a very confused judicial process going on prior to and during the Olympic Games in Rio. And of the total team, about 1/3 of the team was blocked from ever competing, and the rest of the Russian athletes did compete at Rio. Now, in December, I did the second report and fulfilled the final part of the mandate. That's when tell us what athletes are involved and what's going on. That's where I got the 1,000 people from. First thing I said was, look, the facts haven't changed. we have a broader, more complete picture, but we still have the same facts that we had in the summer. And the swapping of samples, yes, it went on at Sochi. I confirmed that. So what was said in the New York Times article was completely accurate, but that was the culmination of a process that had been going on for years and continued afterwards. And so there wasn't just sample swapping at Sochi. It occurred beforehand to test out the procedure, and it occurred later when they were in various crisis modes. The result of all of the work of the IP was an ability to determine that the bottles that contain the urine samples had been corrupted, and the FSB had figured out how you could remove the cap, dump the contents, change the contents, put the cap back on, and leave very little trace of it without a microscopic examination. And I engaged experts to establish that we could do that because we didn't have any direct evidence, because nobody that I ever interviewed or information that I had out of Russia, nobody had actually seen how this was done, and it was done by the FSB, which is the National Police. The reactions to the December report, Sir Craig Reedy is the president of the World Anti-Doping Agency, and he responded and said, well, you can see the scope of the subversion that's gone on and the number of athletes that have benefited over a long period of time. The Director General of WADA is a man named Olivier Nigli, and he's equally confident that all of this had occurred and wanted to make sure that there was some kind of protection for clean athletes, and that Russia ought to be subject to some kind of due process, which had at that point not occurred. And then you had the reaction of the president of the Russian Federation. I think you all know that picture. And I want to just focus on some of his words towards the end of that quote, because I think it captures the essence of what's going on in sport and a few other things that are going on these days. These are his own words, as reported by TASS, the official news agency in Russia. Its essence is the same: to make sports an instrument of geopolitical pressure, of forming a negative image of countries and nations. That was his initial reaction to these reports. And of course, the IOC had its reaction. That's Thomas Bach, president of the International Olympic Committee. And I've got the important words, I think, of his response underlined. He puts out a public statement that he's going to be tough, and if there's sanctions required, they're going to go ahead and do that. They didn't do it in the summer. They haven't done it yet. It's still under discussion, and we'll have to see where it goes. So that's a very quick overview of the independent commission that I was on, and then the independent person commission that I ran myself, which final report of which was in December of 2016. I want to turn now, because I think the part that's probably more interesting or more relevant to you is the insights that you might gain from this kind of international inquiry. I'm not an expert in horse racing or the horse racing industry, but I've studied it up as much as I could in the time I had, so that I could try and see what the parallels might be and what insights I might be able to provide to you that I think are applicable from the work that I've done. And hopefully I have hit some responsive chords in you. Policing the industry. Policing an industry, I think self-reform is perhaps the most desirable, but I mean, here that's really not a possibility. The unique nature of the horse racing industry and the national oversight with external involvement is probably the best and probably also the only approach, since government currently already has a stake in the system and they're likely to never, reluctant at least, to give it up, but perhaps they might be persuaded. So that's one difficulty that I see from the horse racing industry. Then compliance. Fair regulation that builds commitment to fair play and protects the overall industry is crucially important to have a fair playing field. And so strict compliance is a very important fundamental part. And one of the things that was missing was exactly that in Russia. What I noticed, and as I reflect back on the work I've done over the last 2.5 years, almost everyone had accepted a level of cheating. Now, when I say almost everyone, I don't mean just within Russia. They had accepted a level of cheating for quite some time. But it was widely thought that they were doing something, but nobody knew what it was till the reports came out, the four of them, the IC and the IP reports, what it was they were doing. But everybody accepted it. And the problem is, it's cancerous. It gnaws away, it eats and destroys the system. And eventually that led to corrupting officials within Russia and corrupting officials outside of Russia in the track and field area. And so instead of building bridges of information, the corruption was getting worse and was accepted. It was accepted inside the country and outside the country. So I want to turn to something else that I saw from the investigations and I think has application to you. The systematic cheating that was going on was tolerated at the international level, in the international sports community. And I see that as a cultural issue. It was an accepted practice within Russia to do what was going on, what's described in the reports. And nobody particularly thought it was wrong. Now, the two whistleblowers, the Stepanovas, they did, and that's why they became whistleblowers, which is an interesting personal story of its own, which I don't have time to tell you, but they're a fascinating couple. The fragmentation also caused problems. And I notice in your industry, you have 38 different states, fragmentation across the industry, and it's a factor which can contribute to impeding proper regulation, proper growth, and is definitely a problem, and it was clearly a problem in what I was investigating in Russia. Then there's the safeguards. Even though there was safeguards in place, because WADA was accrediting the Moscow lab, for example, WADA is the world regulator, has an accredited lab operating in Moscow, had an accredited lab operating in Sochi. So there were safeguards in place, but even despite that, there was a system devised where cheating was still possible. And the ultimate, and I don't expect we'll ever see this again, but the swapping of athlete samples at Sochi was considered to be acceptable within Russia. But what it did is it, first of all, allowed Russian athletes to be on doping regimes that they shouldn't have been on in the first place, and to either stay on them very close up to the games or even during the games, because when they provide their sample, they know that when it gets to the lab, it's going to be swapped, and they'll come out with a clean analysis, and there will be no issue. And indeed, there were no positives for Russian athletes at the Sochi Winter Olympic Games. Fragmentation is a big problem, and the safeguards, while you have them in place, you need to really watch carefully what's going on, because there's so many different levels to the doping system. It's easy for corruption to creep in and override the safeguards. Something else that I noticed, and I would also put down to reform of culture and attitude, there was very distinct attempts to ignore and hide the impacts. Pieces of this story were known to the World Anti-Doping Agency at various stages from 2011 onwards, But the organization wasn't receptive because people would be told things, they didn't know what to do with it. There was no training about how to handle this kind of information coming in. And human nature being what it is, you don't do anything. You leave it aside because it's hot potato and I don't want to touch it and I'm not going to be the one that says anything about it, so we just ignore it. So the effectiveness of procedural safeguards go hand in hand with the attitude towards the sport. And where this occurs, the culture of doping safeguards simply doesn't work. What happens, I think, is you have isolated members of the sport or the country, they begin to use drugs. Arguably, that might not be a big consequence or impact on an industry or a sport or a country. But then as that culture keeps going and growing and changing, it becomes more pervasive. And there are spillover effects, not only to the athletes, but also to all the others that are involved, coaches, trainers, medical people, regulators, lawmakers. There was a culture of chaos, and even small corruption can cause chaos. And Russia's now in the process, through various international federations and through the World Anti-Doping Agency and the IOC, taking steps to try and come back and rejoin the international anti-doping community and the international sports community. And it's fired coaches and it's fired many of the people named in the reports. In fact, all the people that I've named in the reports, not athletes, Russian officials. But what I notice out of all of that is, while you can change the laws and you can change the people, it still affects the sport and the industry and the country, and you need to get at the fundamental problem, which is the culture. And so I want to come back to culture for a moment. You have to start there. You can change the rules, but that doesn't change the on-the-ground behavior. Those people have got learned behavior, and changing that's a lot harder than changing the rules. And what we're seeing at the moment is change of the rules, change of all the different aspects of the situation, but is the culture really being changed? It's very important to avoid being complacent and dealing with institutional biases. Every institution has that. It's very difficult to separate how things are done from how things should be done. And every institution has these biases, and that is why it's very important to bring in independent persons like myself who don't have any connections to the organization or the parties that are being investigated, so that there are no strings or ties that might cause some skewing of the investigation. And finally, technical competence. You know, the WADA was checking to make sure that the labs could do the proper analytical work, but they never recognized that they needed to play a regulatory role over what was going on. And if you want to engage in a major shift in direction and structure, I think you can only do that when you have some independent assessment like they've had, and then a report to which you have to respond. A few other insights from the IP, and I see I'm running very short of time, so I'll make them quick. But the more the brand is tarnished, the more difficult the reformation. And I certainly think the brand is tarnished, not just with the Russians, but also the IOC and the way it dealt with it. And getting the reputation back is a lot harder than destroying the reputation in the first place. How do you stop the destruction in the first place? Well, you have to have effective testing procedures and identify the inadequacies in the testing procedure, whether it's out of competition inadequacies, lack of double-blind testing, all sorts of different issues of a technical level. And you need to have a proper set of rules, a single set of rules. You need to deal with, in the human world, you have what's called the therapeutic use exemption. You need to have a standardized system with respect to the horse racing world as well. Uniform regulation is extremely important to maintaining and protecting the integrity of the sport. And in that instance, note that WADA, while they could identify what was going on in Russia through these reports, they didn't have the ability to actually deal with anybody other than the athletes, and through the federations they are dealing with the athletes. But they can't touch the sport federations, they can't touch the Olympic Committee, only other parties can do that. So it points out a very important need to change some of the regulations, and then the enforcement of the regulations. I'll just touch on this and then I'll stop. But that's Dr. Rodoshenkov, and he is the was the director of the Moscow lab and the Sochi lab. He was a distinguished scientist. Sorry, there's Dr. Rodoshenkov. Missed the slide there. And what happened to him? Well, he was considered to be a turncoat. He knows where all the bodies are buried. And there's been considerable campaign against him within Russia. And as the top of the slide says, deal with the message, don't deal with the messenger. But that's what's happened to him. He was very crucial to the work that I did as the IP. The IC had Stepanova, which I showed to you earlier on in the talk. And she was punished she wanted to compete at Rio. And she'd committed a doping infraction and had suffered, her sanction had ended in January of 2016. As naturally any athlete would want to compete at the highest level of the Olympic Games. And the IOC blocked her. And in doing so, I think they did a significant amount of harm to whistleblowers in the athletics world and sporting world ever coming forward, because you can see the consequences of being a whistleblower. You are not treated properly, and she certainly wasn't treated properly by the IOC. So it's very important to maintain confidentiality of the information. And equally important, you need to educate the organization and the people in it to be receptive to information that comes to them, and then to know where to go and how to deal with it so that they can put it in the hands of people who can actually do something about it. It's very important to protect whistleblowers and focus on the big picture. The integrity of sport is everything, and the culture can cause you to have a problem, even though the rules may be the best rules you could ever make. I think with that, I probably should stop and say thank you. If anybody's interested, I'm happy to answer some questions out in the lobby. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Professor, for your dedication, your words today, and thank you for your integrity. To follow on with what we just heard regarding human world of sport, we'll now turn our attention to the horse world of sport and the challenges and opportunities surrounding the integrity of thoroughbred racing. This panel's moderator spent a quarter of a century serving as the executive director of the Indiana Horse Racing Commission, and during his tenure, the IHRC was known for its proactive and highly principled approach to regulation. He initiated a unique to the thoroughbred industry laboratory audit, as well as a double-blind sample testing program, and he has recently been appointed by the Humane Society of the United States to their newly formed Horse Racing Advisory Council. Let's please have a warm welcome for a bit of a visionary in our industry, Joe Gorachek. Welcome.
Thank you, kind sir. Good afternoon. I'm just absolutely delighted to be with you today. Our panel, as Tom just said, is going to address the topic of ensuring the integrity of our sport. And before I make a few comments on my own, I'd like to introduce our panelist. Dr. Larry Bowers is president of LD Bowers, LLC. Myra, or Dr. Myra Frederico, is superintendent of the Brazilian Breeders and Owners Association. And last but not least is Louis Romanet, chairman of the International Federation of Horse Racing Authorities. I believe that if we are to place horse racing in a position not only to survive but to prosper, our fans, participants, and the public must believe that our product is free from any unsavory influences. In other words, they need to trust the integrity of our sport. The question is, do they? I can't speak to the perception of our product abroad or in Latin America, but there is ample evidence that indicates how horse racing is viewed here in the United States. The clicker. Oh, here we go. I'm going to show you 3 slides of survey results. The first slide is an interesting survey done by the Association of Racing Commissioners International. That body is the trade association for racing regulators here in North America. Instead of asking questions on this survey, they ask statements and ask the respondents if they agree or do not agree. Most of the respondents, and this is very important, most of the respondents were horsemen, either owners, trainers, or veterinarians. And as you can see, the statement, most people I know cheat, 57.2% agree with that statement. Oh, the same survey. Doping with designer drugs is rampant. Again, almost the same percentage, 51.8% agree. Next slide. This is another survey. This survey was done by the Daily Racing Form. It was published in October of 2015. And unlike the previous 2 slides, this survey consists mostly of horse players. And these are not just any horse players. The demographic of these horse players were a few interesting tidbits is that almost all these horse players, or a great majority of them, consider themselves serious with respect to their sport and have been in the sport and patronizing the sport for over 20 years. And the question they were posed is, do you believe states are currently effectively catching trainers or veterinarians who are using illicit drugs? 78% said no. These slides indicate that obviously something needs to change. That is why I am an unabashed, unapologetic, and enthusiastic advocate for the about to be reintroduced federal legislation. I believe that the Horse Racing Integrity Act will provide the framework that gives the racing industry in the United States the highly principled and integrity-based approach to regulation that it deserves. The issue of integrity, of course, is not limited to the United States. Headlines from across the globe show us that no matter where we race, no racing program is immune to disreputable practices. Why is integrity so important? Well, first and foremost, clean competition in any sport is an ethical imperative. It's simply the right thing to do. But there are more practical reasons for clean competition. Over the past 36 hours, some of the best minds in the business have shared their plans and strategies to improve and grow our sport. You are now in a position to take these ideas and implement them back home. Just this morning, we listened to 2 panels whose topics are critical to the survival and growth of our sport. These panels discussed creating new owners and creating new fans. Fans and owners cycle in and out of the sport for many reasons, including they just get old and die. So the goal of creating new fans and owners is not only about growth, but about survival. At minimum, we must replace the people that leave our sport or it will decline. This goal is not possible if we are marketing horse racing into a headwind of distrust. Our fans and participants must not only perceive horse racing as fun and exciting, but also as humane and fair. As an industry, all of us across the globe must dedicate the necessary resources to provide a clean racing product. If we commit those necessary resources, what strategies should we employ to achieve that goal? This is what our panelists will discuss. And these are some of the areas that will be addressed during the next hour. What are some of the building blocks of an elite racing program, an elite anti-doping program? What can we learn from the experience of those that combat doping in the human sports arena? What are other countries doing to ensure the integrity of their racing product? And what efforts are being made globally to harmonize rules and standards to provide a level playing field? I would like to introduce our first panelist, and that is Dr. Larry Bowers. He's our leadoff batter, and Dr. Bowers is uniquely qualified to appear before us today. Over the past 15 years, from 2000 until his retirement last year, Dr. Bowers served as a Chief Science Officer for USADA, the United States Anti-Doping Agency. By virtue of that position, Dr. Bowers was involved in some of the most important changes that have occurred in anti-doping, human anti-doping. Dr. Bowers wrote the first WADA International Standards for Laboratories, and he also was involved in the first Athletes' Whereabouts program, which is so critical for implementing out of competition. Dr. Bowers, welcome.
Okay. Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be here today. I'm going to try to set the tone a little bit for the overall elements that go into an effective anti-doping program for you and talk a little bit about what pieces there might be that maybe you haven't thought about before. Just as a general concept behind anti-doping, anti-doping is really not about catching people. I noticed that on one of Joe's slides. It's really about deterring people from doing that behavior in the first place. And it turns out that values are the most important things that contribute to making a decision to follow the rules. In other words, you know it's wrong to break the rules, so you don't break them. But what happens when the commitment to the rules weakens? Then we go to something that's basically rational choice, which is decided in your best interest. And rational choice is based on weighing the benefits and the risks. If the benefits outweigh the risks, you break the rules and do the behavior to benefit yourself. If the risks outweigh the benefits, you decide to follow the rules, even though your values were compromised by, say, you believe everybody else is cheating. There are really 3 factors that directly affect risk assessment if we get to that point. The first one is the perceived, and I'm going to use that word perceived a lot because it doesn't so much matter what the facts are, it matters what people think the facts are. So it's the perceived certainty of being detected and sanctioned. And it turns out I put that one in red on the slides because that is the most important of the 3. And I'm going to come back to why and some of the other elements of the program that support that certainty of being detected and sanctioned. The second important concept is the severity of the sanction. So if the sanction isn't significant compared to what the benefits are, you get no deterrence. And the last one is the perceived timeliness of the sanction. So if it takes forever to get a sanction put in place and the person benefits from the winnings or whatever they've gotten, the ill-found benefits of their behavior, then again, you lose deterrence. So if you want to remember, the three words are certainty, severity, and celerity. Those are the three keys to deterrence. So how can an anti-doping organization affect risk perception? Well, one of the things it can do is change the number of tests. And the second thing that it can do is provide ambiguity in testing times and methods. And what do I mean by that? Remember, we're trying to change the perceived certainty of being caught. And if you're not sure when you're going to be tested or what you're going to be tested for, that really changes your perception of what happens and how likely it is that you might get caught. So we use things like out-of-competition tests with no advance notice in order to keep people on edge, if you will, keep them honest in terms of not doing doping behaviors. We use in-competition tests because there are some drugs that benefit the individual in competition as opposed to out of competition, and so we do need an in-competition program. And at least on the human side, we're looking very much into variation in collection type, whether we use urine, blood, oral fluid. We're actually looking into exhaled air at the moment to detect drugs and getting into dried blood and plasma spots as things to help us in specific areas. Now, one of the things, looks like my slide got turned backwards. One of the things that I wanted to show you, and it's covered up unfortunately, is two things here. One of the things we did when I was at USADA was tried to model how things like the number of tests might be impacted or what kind of impact they have on deterrence. And so the smaller part of the two is just sort of the baseline, and I just want you to look at the blue line, which is the top one. And if you look at that, if we do about 5 or 6 out-of-competition tests a year per competitor, that's enough to get 95, 98% deterrence. They won't use it, they won't use drugs because they're unsure whether or not they might get caught. The part that's covered up, unfortunately, shows you what happens if you look at a drug, let's say, that's very short-lived, like some of the new peptide hormones that we're all seeing athletes, whether they be human or equine athletes, use, where the window of detection is very small. And what you would see, if you could see it, is that the number of tests to get even to 90% deterrence triples. So instead of 6 tests being enough, we're now talking about doing 18 tests, which obviously has budget and other kinds of implications. So we need to take a careful look at that. Again, other things that the agencies can do to try to improve deterrence, we combine sport-specific testing needs with deterrence concepts. What do I mean by sport-specific? A sport like tennis, let's say, that competes 48 weeks out of the year, out of competition means something very different in that sport than it does in a seasonal sport where the athletes may compete for 5 months and be off for 7. So we have to tailor our needs to the specifics of the sport, and that certainly would apply in horse racing as well. You have to test at the right times using the right collection type for the right substances. And I'll talk a little bit more as I get to the end about what that might mean. And it's really important, and Richard McLaren brought this up a bit, but procedural fairness is an extremely important part of ensuring integrity. If you have a country or you have a particular group of people who seem to be outside of the rules, that undermines the entire program, and it's very difficult to recover from that. I want to spend just a few seconds on laboratory role in detection. Obviously, they're very important. If I had one thing that I had to say about the laboratory, it's that the laboratories that do anti-doping work, it's really all about the people, their expertise and their experience. This is not simple testing. It is not testing that remains the same. New substances come up all the time and we need to deal with them. And the only way you do that is with a good staff. You can check laboratory proficiency in a number of ways. I'm a strong advocate of performance-based laboratory standards as opposed to telling the laboratory exactly the method that they have to use to detect X, Y, or Z. So if we know that a particular drug is effective at 1 nanogram per mil, you tell the lab, you need to detect this at 1 nanogram per mil. We don't care how you detect it at 1 nanogram per mil. The other side of that is if you have a program with methods that are specified, I would contend that the people who like to cheat would soon have a book that would be the ways to beat the textbook on how to do testing. So if we really have to pay attention to that. A lot of continued education for the laboratory. State-of-the-art instrumentation is an absolute must. I mentioned peptide hormones before. 5 years ago, we couldn't have detected any of the substances, any of the peptide hormones that we're seeing now, and that's all because of new equipment advances, and those have to make it into the laboratory. And then proficiency tests. I don't have the time to talk about single and double blind, but they tell you something different. Single blind tells you what the lab does at its best. Double blind tells you what they do on a routine basis. Very important that you know both. And then last but not least, research into detecting new doping substances and methods is absolutely critical, because if people know they can beat their tests, they're not going to be deterred. So really quickly, as a conclusion, anti-doping is really about deterrence. In order to deter, we have to catch people for sure, but we really want them not to do the behavior to begin with. Certainty of detection, or rather perceived certainty of detection and sanction, is the most important factor that impacts people's risk assessment and therefore that impacts deterrence. Programmatic decisions and laboratory proficiencies contribute to the perceived ability of people to beat the testing. So we have to be ever vigilant on both of those things. Richard touched on the point about the programmatic decisions that were made that maybe enabled some of the cheating that went on in the Soviet Union or in Russia. And lastly, programmatic decisions really determine the program effectiveness. We combined tests when I was at USADA with intelligence gathering. We got tips, we had ways to integrate information into what kind of tests we did, and that ranged anywhere from us actually scheduling a test or developing a test that we hadn't done before and applying it, to actually running a case based just solely on the intelligence. Individuals and organizations, Richard covered this, we need to think about who needs to be sanctioned and how they need to be sanctioned and how we can achieve that. Obviously, perceptual fairness is extremely important to the whole process. And then, of course, perceived conflicts of interest can undermine the things that we do. So with that, I will close. Thank you for your attention.
Good job. Good job. Our next speaker is Dr. Myra Frederico. Dr. Frederico is a veterinarian. She's also a graduate of the Darley Flying Start program, and she's managed for 7 years, served as the director of racing for 7 years for the racetrack in Rio de Janeiro, and she's currently the superintendent of the Brazilian Owners and Breeders Association. Myra is relatively unique among panelists at this conference because she's one of the few panelists that appeared at the first Pan Am conference in 2015. So backed by popular demand to give us an update on the regulatory progress in South America is Dr. Myra Frederico.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. First, I would like to say thanks to the Pan American Conference organizers that I'm here again. It's an honor. Thank you very much. Second, I think I can say goodbye because Horacio and Carlos covered almost all of my topics. Just kidding. I will start showing a quick, is it on? No, sorry. I'll start showing a quick quickly the countries that are part of Latin America and where they stand in the relation to the black type races. As you can see, part one, we have Argentina, Brazil, Chile, and Peru. Part two, Uruguay, Panama, and Venezuela. And part three, Ecuador and Mexico. The other Latin American countries, they don't participate. For those who were not here in New York in 2015, I spoke about taking Lasix out of all of the black type races in South American countries. And this is an update of the graphic I showed in 2015. As you can see from the data, beginning in 2012, when furosemide was allowed in Group 1 and 2 races in Argentina and Uruguay through the present day, the restriction of Lasix at the racetracks has not affected the average numbers of starters over the years. So mainly, I would like you to look at 2012 and 2016. I put just the racetracks from Argentina and Uruguay because those are the numbers we had in 2012. Chile doesn't have the numbers of Lasix that they use, and Brazil had already banned, so that's why it's just for you to have an idea. This is the average, and you can see the last row, the total. You can see that the average of runners is the same, maybe a little bit more runners without Lasix on all the listed races. To talk a little bit about what happened before, in 2012, the Brazilian Breeders' Association requested all the racetracks in Brazil to send the listed races to a certified lab. In 2013, Gávea Racetrack, which is Jockey Clube Brasileiro, started sending the samples to LCH in France. And then in 2016, at the Gran Premio Latinoamericano in Rio de Janeiro, there were 2 positives for testosterone. The winner, Stronach from Argentina, and the 5th place, Rio Alipen from Chile. There was a feeling by some in the industry that the positive tests were an embarrassment. In my opinion, it was a reality check. It would be an embarrassment if we didn't do anything about it. But we did. Some of us changed the laboratory, as Carlos mentioned in Chile. Some of us changed the rules, as we did in Brazil. Some of us started sending overseas. So each one of us made an effort to improve on this matter. So last year we were at ICRAV. It's a conference of veterinarians and chemistries that happened in Uruguay in October. And Brazil was very criticized because we didn't suspend the horses. In our rules and regulations, we didn't suspend the horses until 2016. So after that, there was a request about the issue, and we started suspending the horse from 1st of January of this year. In Argentina, in December, the laboratories located at the racetrack in San Isidro and in Palermo started testing for anabolic steroids. In Peru, they test all their black type races in UC Davis. Uruguay will start sending their samples to France, to LCH, from 1st of June. And Chile has changed their rules, and they changed the lab they were using, and a dramatic rise on number of positive tested were reported in the initial months. When they implemented, it increased around 250% the number of positives, as Carlos mentioned. As a result, it was decided to delay the suspensions to 1st of June, allowing the horsemen to adjust to these new rules. Our future goals. to have the South American racing community understand the goals and not resist sending samples to a certified lab. As you could see in the other panel, it's hard to make everyone to go to the same way. Harmonization amongst all South American countries in the use of furosemide and bute. Continue submitting samples to a certified lab, because it's very hard. I can give an example for Jockey Clube Brasileiro in Rio. It's very hard to keep sending it political because some people really question about it. So this is very important. And OSAF is working, as Horacio mentioned, and also Carlos, to get a certified lab in South America, which probably will be the lab in San Isidro. To make it short, we have a lot of issues to address, especially harmonization and changing the culture. But South America have been doing an improvement on the subject when we are talking about anti-doping, as you could see. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Myra. Our next speaker, of all of the speakers and the panelists over the last day and a half, this next speaker, Mr. Louis Romanet, is probably the only one that does not need an introduction. So I will be brief. It's an absolute honor for me to introduce Mr. Romanet. The Romanet family name has been revered in horse racing circles across the globe for over 3 generations. The Romanet family has been involved in promoting the sport and the integrity of the sport for over 100 years. Mr. Louis Romanet is a chairman of the International Federation of Horse Racing Authorities, a position he has held since the inception of the authority since 1994. It is a privilege and honor for me to introduce to you Mr. Louis Romanet.
Thank you very much for your kind words. And I would like also to thank Jim Gagliano, Horacio, and Pablo. We had a dream some years ago to organize a Pan American conference. They've done it together. It's already the second one and the end of the second one. And it's hard to believe, but I think both have been very successful. And I hope there will be food for more conferences in the future. So I will try to go back a little on what we are trying to achieve and to be as concrete as possible. What does mean the global integrity of racing? I've tried on this slide to outline the most important part of it because it is one of our main issues. Because we are living from the betting industry is financing the breeding and the racing, and so we must have a clean sport and a clean activity. We are also there to select the thoroughbred breed, and we must never forget that. That's our aim, and that needs a proper way of breeding and racing horses. This must cover all the life of the horse. In the past, we've been concentrating on racing for a lot of reasons, including economic reasons. But we must follow the whole life of the horse and be able to control the horses wherever they are, to have full traceability with permanent access, like for athletes, it was mentioned earlier, in order to be able to have total transparency and to test any horse at any time, anywhere. And we've been trying year after year in the international agreement on breeding, racing, and wagering to define model rules and to recommend best practice. But only the racing authorities, the national racing authorities, and the International Stud Book Committee for the breeding side can implement them. If you look at the international agreement, which is revised on a regular basis every year, it was started in 1967 at the first conference, and it's updated every year. And in this international agreement, it's on the website of the Federation, you can find it easily. There is more than 80 pages, and the article on the integrity of the horse represent 8 pages, 10% of the page, with paragraphs on prohibited substances, genetic and cellular manipulations, prohibited practices, medication in training, out of competition testing, to show you that we are covering the global situation. What's important, which is the IFHA philosophy. The philosophy is very clear. You have it here on the top of the slide. Horses should compete only when they are free of medication and drugs. For us, there cannot be any other philosophy. That's why we have worked so much on this Article 6 of the International Agreement in order to implement model rules that can be, and best practices that can be used all over the world. It is very important to develop out-of-competition testing, because it's very clear that we have new major doping agents which we are researching, and these are like anabolic agents, peptides, growth hormones, metabolic modulators, and a lot of these new substances are also eliminated rapidly. And if you don't control the horses in training out of competition, you will not find them. We must improve the capacity of our laboratories to detect specific drugs. There is in the world about 60 specialized labs on horse racing with about 500,000 horses which are tested, and we have to work in order to certify these labs. So we have launched this program of certification 2 years ago, and we have finalized it last Wednesday in Washington. We had the Executive Council meeting of the International Federation, and at that meeting we have been assessing 5 IFHA reference labs, which you see on that slide. One is in Australia, it's a lab from Flemington. Was in France. For example, France, we are testing 45,000 samples for 35 different countries, which represent a global budget of 11 million euros, including collection of the sample, testing of the samples, and research. You insisted on the research side earlier, and it is a very important part of it. We have also assessed LGC, the Newmarket Lab, the Hong Kong Jockey Club lab, and UC Davis, California, with the lab which has Scott Stanley as director. We have taken these 5 directors as a task force, and I think it is something very important. We will publish all the documents for the assessment procedure and for all the system. In about a month, 2-3 weeks, we have to finalize some of the documents, and all this will be published on the website. If we look at these laboratories, it's very clear that when in the past we've been having new countries sending their samples, we found out that we had a lot of positives, and which clearly shows that around the world there is a difference of capacity. And one very important point which we must never forget is that the sensitivity of the labs have been increasing, and I've been talking to Dr. Bonner before this meeting, and I asked him how much the sensitivity of the material that they use has increased, and he told me during the last 10 years by about 1,000 times. So this is very important, because when we started to have positive or therapeutic substance, we had a position in the old times that we didn't want to indicate detection times, and we had changed our philosophy in order to be able to answer to the professional. And we have published on our website of the Federation now 28 international screening limits, which should be used by all the labs in the world, which show that even if we find, by going deeper in testing the sample in our research, we can find some traces of the substance, we will know by the very, very low quantity that this has been done for therapeutic reasons, and there is no reason to sanction the horse. And at the same time, we are publishing detection times, which are recommended for the vets. So when I was listening about the debate on the zero tolerance, we're no more working, in fact, really on the zero tolerance. It's a zero tolerance behind international screening limits, which is a very different issue. Well, clearly, we need an harmonized system between all the countries. And the process, which is very important for us, will be to expand the laboratories which have an IFHA reference. I've been listening to my friend Horacio, but Horacio, we will treat you like everybody. You must do the job. I think the first step was what you said, to select a lab, because it's impossible to have 5 labs in South America that would become reference lab. But we will do everything we can. But make no mistakes, it's a long process, it's expensive, but we have some people that can help and that can audit. Yves Bonner, who was the director of the French lab, has retired, and we have other people that can be available. But it is very important to have labs which have been approved by IFHA in all continents, and we will have a regular review of this lab every 2 or 3 years. We'll have proficiency testing samples which will be shared among the laboratories in a single blind mode first, and if possible a double blind, as it was mentioned earlier. I will always remember one day we were having a blind test between the European labs, and the French labs find 3 different substances, prohibited substances, while the other only find 2. And so we were questioning how it could happen, and after an inquiry, we found out that the veterinary that have been giving the substance had been using his gloves for another substance, and that there was in fact 3 substances. But it shows that only 1 out of 3 find it. So it shows how important it is to do this kind of program, of exchange programs on a regular basis. Then what can we do with that in the future? We're going to work with all these labs. We will have new labs, and here you have a picture of the present situation of international cataloging standards, which is the blue book, which all the breeders are knowing by heart. And if you look at part 1, there is 20 countries, which represent 1,972 graded races, including 459 grade 1 races, which means a little less than a quarter of all the races. And you have on the slide the division between the countries, and you have the indication of the grade 1 countries in which we already have the reference labs since Wednesday. Australia, France, Great Britain, Hong Kong, and USA. So if we would like to start by having a level playing field at grade 1 level, it's not a very difficult situation because we have only about 206 additional races to sample, but we have also to jump on some legal issues because some of these countries are federal countries where it's very clear that it's difficult to impose to all American racetracks to test their grade 1s in UC Davis. But as you've been listening to our South American friends, they've been doing a great job by sending samples to foreign labs. We are working with these new reference labs in order to try to shorten the delay because the delay is very important because the horse can run again before you have taken the decision. At the Executive Council, we discussed also the issue of the world rankings, and it's something which is very important because, as was mentioned by our South American friends, we had some problems, as you know, with a horse like Doink. Well, I'm sure most of you remember Big Brown. When Big Brown in 2008 won the Kentucky Derby and the Preakness Stakes, and then the trainer declared that he was putting his horse on steroids once a month. This horse was published with his ratings. At that time, there was no Longines World Rankings, but now we have. And last year, we had two horses, Doink, who had a ranking of 117, and Masochistic, who had a ranking of 115, who appeared in the world rankings. We consider at IFHA that this is not acceptable. And if we are facing, well, the publication have already been done in January for last year, but if in the future we have situation arising like this one, we will exclude the horses concerned if he has been disqualified in his country from the ranking, because Doink was disqualified from the Gran Premio Latinoamericano, was not prohibited from racing, was not suspended because it was, as it was explained, the rule was not included in the Brazilian rules of racing. And he then won on May 25th, two months later. He won another Group 1, and evidently was still under the effect of the steroids, but they were not appearing due to the delay. So we must treat this case very seriously, and I can tell you that I was questioned by Longines about these cases because it doesn't give a good image for the sponsor and the partner. And I really support all the efforts which are made by South America and by OSAF, and we will be always there to help you as much as we can, because we know that it is difficult to harmonize, but it is vital. And we will have to treat another case this year because Depend, the horse who finished fourth in the Gran Premio Latinoamericano, was tested positive in the French lab with a vasodilatator. So that's something that we have to address. So if we look at the conclusion, my answer is yes, we can guarantee a level playing field if we can agree on major issues. And one of the major issues is the number one on the slide: harmonization of the anti-doping rules must be achieved worldwide. So either it's through the international agreement and the best practices which we are recommending, either it can be through a racing integrity legislation like you are trying to achieve in the United States, and we joined the coalition to show that we were giving you our support, or we support, as I said, the efforts of OSAF for harmonization. We need, as I said, if we want to have a very efficient control, full traceability and out-of-competition testing. The concept of IFHA reference laboratories now is in front of us, and I'm sure we can have more labs which will become reference labs in the future. We should start a program to test all grade 1 races in the reference labs. I think that's very important, but it's not an easy decision because it's a political decision. We have IRPAC, Carl Hamilton is in the room, he's the chairman. I'm sure he will be glad to listen to me. But I think IRPAC should impose that to get a grade 1 status, the horses that would finish in the first 4 should be tested in a reference lab. I think it's the guarantee to have a level playing field, at least between the countries of Part 1 in the future. And horses that would be disqualified should no more appear in the world rankings. I think I would just like to conclude by saying one thing. If all the people who are in this room are convinced of what I said and support it, let's do it together. Thank you.
Very good.
Let's go through a few topics. Louis, Larry, you both mentioned out-of-competition testing in your presentation. How valuable or how critical is it to an anti-doping program to do out-of-competition testing? Louis, let's start with you.
I think it has become absolutely vital because with new substances, with horses that are sometimes leaving their training center to go at a stud, you have to be able to control horses on a permanent basis. We have recently, we created out-of-competition testing in France 20 years ago. My father created that policy 20 years ago. And we found out that it was becoming more and more important to follow horses when they were also going out of training. Because we were suddenly seeing a horse that was disappearing, going to a stud farm, coming back 6 months later, and winning. Clearly, he had been treated on steroids or other substances like that. So we have been doing last year 135 tests in stud farms of horses that were resting, that had some accident and some problem. I think it is very important because the more we go, the more the substances will disappear very quickly, and then you will have negative tests, but we will have not achieved anything.
Okay. Larry, do you agree?
Yeah, totally. As I said, I think the real key is the deterrence aspect, and if the perception is that there are periods of time when you can hide the athlete, whoever it happens to be, and not be subject to testing, it just opens a holiday for doping if the person's inclined to do that.
Okay. There's an issue that came up last month. At the end of the RCI convention, the RCI stands for the Association of Racing Commissioners International, which is a trade association of racing regulators in North America. And coming out of that conference at the end was a statement or a challenge, I take it, for USADA. It was reported, widely reported in the racing trades. I have a copy of an article that the Pollock report did, and it's entitled RCI's Martin. It says, "Let USADA bid to do equine testing." It's dated April 21st, last month. And I want to quote a few sentences, and Larry, I'd like you to comment on it. If USADA wants to get involved in racing, there's nothing stopping them. They could do that today by responding to a procurement from a racing commission to do their testing. So it might be good if every commission, the next time you do a procurement for lab services, to include USADA on the bid list. Let them make a proposal. Larry, what do you think of that challenge?
First of all, let me say, since I'm retired, I don't speak for USADA anymore. So,
but go back on your wealth of experience with the association.
That's fine. I think I tried to make the point in the discussion that an anti-doping program is more than just laboratory tests, and it's uniform rules. It's being able to process that intelligence information, incorporating it into your collection routines, and all those sorts of things. I don't see a real advantage to being low bidder for 38, I thought I heard the word 38 separate contracts, because I don't think that's really what's going to benefit horse racing.
And the procurement process, and I've been involved in it quite a few times in Indiana, the procurement process is viewed in a very efficient manner, meaning that the low bidder in most cases does get the contract. I've been in a situation where I've recommended a high bidder. The state required me to get the low bidder. Could you envision a situation where USADA might be low bidding on services for racing laboratory work?
Can I envision that?
Can you envision that?
No, I can't see USADA putting in the low bid, no.
Okay, I hear you. Let's talk a little bit about the legislation. Louis, the IFHA was one of the first groups in the coalition to pursue the legislation. Was that an easy decision for you to make?
It was, no, for me, no. It was a political decision, but I immediately had reaction of people criticizing me in France because HSUS was part of the coalition, and they say, how can the IFHA join HUSS? You know
Yes.
what I'm talking. There was their representative. I was listening to one of the big, well-known representatives yesterday, and they were saying, "How can you join them?" But I had immediately called the Jockey Club, Jim Gagliano. We had an exchange on the position they were taking, how they were dealing, and I was absolutely convinced that we had done the right thing. I think it's very important because, bon. The problem is that the international agreement, we are recommending best practice, but IFHA is not a sports federation. It's a private association with members which are racing authorities, and some of them have the power to regulate in their country, some don't have the power, so we have totally different situations. So, and we do not organize international events, so we cannot impose. Like FEI.
Right.
In the equestrian world, FEI, they organize all the top 5 stars competition and they impose their rules and they impose the labs. So we have to convince people. That's why we need everybody to be united. I know very well the situation around the world, in the States or in South America, but clearly the people that are facing these problems are all in the room today.
Absolutely.
In our countries, it's easier, I would say. But I think if they get together with the strong voices, like we've been listening to Andy Barr yesterday, I think they should succeed.
Right. Myra, you had mentioned that there's a goal of getting a reference laboratory in South America. Is there a holdup? What's the dynamics of pulling that off?
Yeah, the people involved, we know that to get a lab that it's, I forgot the proper word.
Reference lab, IFHA reference
No,
What do you mean?
that can pay itself.
Which
Like viable.
Yes,
To have a viable lab.
Financially viable.
Financially viable, thank you. Financially viable lab. You need around 20,000 samples per year. So for that, we have to have all the countries from South America together doing in one lab because, for example, Uruguay, they have 3,500 samples per year. Brazil, around 4,000 samples per year. Argentina, 8,000 samples per year. So all the countries together in South America, we have 21,000 samples per year. So that would make a laboratory viable, financially viable.
So everyone would have to agree to send their...
To send to the same lab, yeah.
Sure, sure. I know we're running kind of close on time right now, so I'm going to throw out a last question, and that's going to go to Larry. I'd like you to, you worked for USADA for 15 years. Why don't you share with us why you think USADA is a good selection with regard to the federal legislation to take over the anti-doping program?
Well, so there, as I said before, there are multiple aspects to an anti-doping program. So in our case, it was collection, testing, adjudication, research, education. All of those things need to come together to have a good program. So that's an important piece of it. I think from a scientific standpoint, as you've heard from all of us, being at the front of what's going on, sharing information, taking in tips and so on, and incorporating that into the overall piece of the testing, I think is very important. And probably the most important thing in terms of an entity that oversees testing, I think it needs to be independent. So there are tough decisions to be made. I don't need to mention some of the individuals that were brought, that received sanctions under USADA, and there were some tough decisions to be made there. And that's the kind of independent organization and someone that looks to the future that needs to be had.
Well, thank you so much. We've run out of time. There won't be any Q&A in this session, but I think the speakers will be around for a little while. So if you want to catch us out back, but you've been a great audience. I think we have a dynamite speaker coming up next. So thank you very much for sitting here and listening to us.
Thank you much, Joe, and the panel was all very interesting stuff that we've got to pay a good deal of attention to these days. And it's a global situation, and that's what makes these conferences so valuable to us all. So, well, thank you.
You're welcome.
That's gin for our next speaker. Very good. We're now heading into the home stretch for our conference with our final keynote address. She's called a global leader of tomorrow, a trailblazer. She has been ranked by Fortune magazine as one of the world's most powerful women in business. And Time magazine ranked her as one of the world's 100 most influential people. She established her own charitable foundation as an incubator for innovative projects that provide educational opportunities for young women and Aboriginal youth and help improve the lives of young people in developing nations. She is the co-chairman and president of the Stronach Group, a privately held company that owns, operates, and manages a number of leading businesses outside of thoroughbred horse racing, of course, in various industries, including racing and technology and entertainment. She also serves as the chairman of Acasta Capital, a strategic and financial advisory services firm. And because post time is 6:30 tomorrow for the Preakness, I cannot list everything that she is or does. Ladies and gentlemen, the list goes on, but please join me in welcoming the Honorable Belinda Stronach. All right, Belinda. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Tom, for those very nice words and that introduction. And I have to say, all of that stuff happened before I got into horse racing. So we'll see where the future takes me. And my daughter spoke here yesterday morning, and I heard she's 23, and she spoke about thoroughbred aftercare, and she did a smashing job, I heard, and so I have big shoes to fill, not only from my daughter's perspective, but from my father's perspective. So it's a tough spot to be in, but it gives me great pleasure to be here with you today and to be able to share with you some of the things that we're doing at the Stronach Group, where we want to take things in the future, some of the risks that we're taking, because this is a great sport of horse racing, and we want to make sure that we introduce this sport to a whole new generation of fans. So before I begin, I also would like to thank the Latin American Racing Channel for hosting me today, and Jim Gagliano from the Jockey Club for also hosting me today. Thank you for the invitation to be with you all. You've all heard that a picture is worth 1,000 words. Well, a sizzle reel may be worth 1,000 words as well. So I thought I'd begin today by showing you the Stronach Group sizzle reel, which gives you a little bit of the flavor of where we wish to go in the future. So on that note, let's go to the sizzle reel. Thank you. Some of you may wonder why Conor McGregor was in that video, and there's a little bit of humor in there, and I'll come back to that. For those of you that are not familiar with the Stronach Group, we have tracks across North America, and beginning in the state of Maryland, Laurel and Pimlico, which is, as all of you know, home of the Preakness, and I hope that many of you will be joining us tomorrow. Then moving on to Florida, there's Gulfstream Park, which is home of the Florida Derby and the inaugural running of the Pegasus World Cup Invitational. And I'm going to talk a little bit about our experience there, which I think some of you are keen to hear how that went. Then as we move to the West Coast, there's Santa Anita Park, which we're very proud has most often hosted the Breeders' Cup and most recently did in 2016. And in Northern California and San Francisco, we have Golden Gate Fields, and then moving further up the coast to the north, we have the track Portland Meadows in Portland, Oregon. In 2016, we had close to 2.2 million visitors to our facilities. We ran 760 live race days. We had over 12 million television viewers. We had relationships with 850 simulcast centers worldwide. We had over 657,000 social media followers, and we hosted over 500 non-racing events. There was over $4 billion wagered on Stronach Group races last year, and about $10 billion annually in the industry, which gives us roughly about 40% of the market share. Unfortunately, wagering has been on the decline since 2008 and continues to decline each year. We believe some of the reasons for that are other forms of gambling, faster play games, and the inability of horse racing to capture the television audience and the failure of our sport to attract the next generation of fans. That's the big question. How do we attract that next generation of fans? And we struggle as a company with that as well. And I think we do collectively as an industry. But we're trying some new things, and we're taking some risks at the Stronach Group. I think the biggest change in our culture or the discussions we have as a management group is that we really view our company, first and foremost now, as an entertainment company, because we really have to compete for the time and the attention and the eyeballs with other sporting events, other sporting platforms, other forms of entertainment. So if we don't provide that great entertainment experience for our customers, they're going to go elsewhere. So maybe to make an analogy, and not exactly like this, but to give an example of how I see things, I view us sort of a marriage between an AEG and a Caesars. An AEG in the sense that we own the stadiums and we're responsible for curating the content on our stadiums, obviously with horse racing and enhanced horse racing at the core and wagering. That's our bread and butter, that's at the core of it. But we need to look at all forms of entertainment and providing that great customer experience to make sure that the on-track experience is great and that people want to come back. So whether you want to go for a casual experience and that's, with your buddies and you want to go with a burger or go for a burger and a beer, it's got to be a great burger and a beer in a great environment that's fun, that's cool, and you feel safe. And likewise, if you want a more, let's call it for fun, a Vegas-style experience, we should be able to offer that as well. So then I refer to Caesars, and I'm going to say Caesars with money, but Caesars in the sense that how we know our customers and the reward programs that Caesars provides their customers. So I view the future of our company and the horse racing industry. I am really optimistic about it because I look at all of the assets we have, and I think it's tremendous. I believe it's the last great sporting legacy platform, though, that has not yet modernized. But what we have at the core is super exciting. The potential is vast, and I think we need to work together as an industry to address some of the challenges that we have. But I really am very, very optimistic about what we can achieve together in the future. And that the Stronach Group, we're really willing to take some of the risks, to try some new things to make that happen. So one of the things that we're investing heavily in is technology to attract that new fan base and looking at things like, for example, the gamification of our sport to appeal to younger people, the mindset is more what I'm talking about, and creating new wagering platforms that are that broader funnel, easy to access, where you learn how to become a handicapper and a bettor. So we're placing a lot of emphasis and putting a lot of resources towards that. We haven't launched it yet, but we certainly hope to have that in place by next year's Pegasus World Cup Invitational in January at Gulfstream Park for the second year. On the technology note, we have about 75 million social media impressions in 2016 and in early part of 2017. We have about 660,000 social media followers right now among 18 unique channels, and we have the highest social follower growth rates in the industry. I touched a little bit on Pegasus World Cup. And I refer to Pegasus World Cup because it's one of the first major new things that we've tried. And one of our goals is to create more marquee events that bring excitement to the sport. And so the team put its, and I give my father a lot of credit for it, he led the charge in terms of the idea to create the world's richest horse race, which would bring together, hopefully internationally, horses from around the world to compete for a very lucrative prize. So the best of the best. And then our goal is to invest around that, to bring excitement to it, to use that, to leverage off it, to create that new fan base. So one of the things, I talked about taking risks, and some people love it, some people don't love it, but certainly I think everyone will acknowledge that what I'm about to show you, and I'm sorry, it's a little bit long, but we didn't have time to really edit it down, is the PR clips or the media clips featuring Conor McGregor, the most well-known MMA artist. And the reason we chose Conor is because he has 13 million social followers. He's super, well-known among the younger generation, and he's liked by a wide cross-section of young fans. So we wanted to leverage off his platform to gain access to a newer and younger generation. So the challenge for us is how to convert that attention, and I'll come back to how much attention we received, and to ultimately convert them into horse racing fans and customers, and that they get to love the sport, and that they ultimately would also like to enjoy it and wager. So I suggest maybe on that note, keep an open mind, watch it with a sense of humor, and the Conor McGregor clips that we're about to roll to now. But I think whether you love him or you hate him, I think everyone can pretty much agree. They had, the comments I got, the feedback, said, you know what? For the first time ever, my daughter's friends, whatever, they came and said, what is with this Pegasus horse race? And, and they tuned in to watch it. We also concurrently ran all kinds of interesting contests for younger people so that they would tune into the race. We're still learning how to convert them into longtime horse lovers, but I think we had some good success with trying this. So on that note, let's go to the Conor clips.
What's this all about?
Conor McGregor is making an announcement.
What's an MMA fighter doing at a racetrack?
Alexander wept when he had no worlds left to conquer. That's exactly how I feel. Today, I would like to announce to the world that I will become the pound-for-pound #1 jockey on the planet with the help of my new trainer.
How about me?
I'll be competing in and winning the Pegasus World Cup Invitational. That's right, I'm gonna be first. Okay, now I'll take questions until I get bored.
Conor, anyone in your family? Why the Pegasus World Cup Invitational?
The biggest horse racing purse in the world, that's why. $12 million.
Purse means money, not an actual purse. Although I'm sure Conor could pull off even the daintiest of feminine carry-alls. What?
Doesn't being a jockey require years of focus and training?
Listen, buddy, how hard can horse racing even be? I'm the greatest at whatever I decide to do.
Somebody's been punched in the head a few too many times. Just because you're good at running around in a cage with funny little shorts on.
You moron! You're ruining our special day!
You're dead now!
Next, on the 13th Jockey.
You may be the king in your little world of M-A-M.
MMA? You go. Pegasus. Hey, Coach, what's that?
Where the... Ow! Come on, tough guy, faster, faster.
How's this even gonna make me a better jockey?
I'm teaching you discipline.
At least you can do is pay attention to me while I'm busting my ass.
Well, you're not the only one who's gonna win $12 million at the races. I'm playing Pegasus win-win. You just enter the sweepstakes online. Top prize is $1 million.
I shot $1 million every morning.
That must be painful. Now look, Connor, I'm trying to make you the world's greatest jockey. You may be the king in your little world of M-A-M.
It's MMA, you absolute gobshite.
You're the absolute gobshite, you gobshite. What's a gobshite? Ah!
Next, on the 13th jockey.
Now, obviously, you don't say this until I hand you the reins, because I'll be dragged helplessly behind you. But the code word to make this horse go fast is
I can't hear you, Coach. Come again?
jitterbug.
Jelly bean, you say?
Jitterbug! Oh! Stop! Stop! Oh!
Pegasus!
Pegasus. I just want you to know I gave you my very first race outfit. My Nana made it for me.
Well, she must have hated you too, Coach.
Rude. Well, if you don't want to wear a traditional race jacket, what do you want to wear?
Nothing.
I'm sorry?
I want to ride bareback. Stark bollock naked.
Well, you can't. Not sure it's an official rule, but it'd definitely be a major ouchie on your dangly bits. Frankly, it's not very sanitary.
Good point.
But if you could wear anything you wanted to in your first race, Connor, what would it be?
Horse racing's been called the sport of kings. Me, your new king. You're ruining the moment, man.
You're ruining the moment.
Next, on the 13th jockey.
Connor, you forgot your socks.
Good girl. Good girl.
Lord have mercy.
Pegasus!
Connor, ready to qualify for the Pegasus World Cup Invitational? All right, here's my secret winning technique. Ride this horse. You ride it as fast as you can. And then you get to the finish line first.
That's it. To get to the finish line first.
Oh, what the hell do you want to do? Get to the finish line last?
Never even trained jockeys, have you?
I have not. Connor, do me a favor. I want you to wear my lucky scarf.
Whatever.
Coming around the far turn with Ladybug in the lead, and right behind is the Combinator. In third is Fuzzy Lou. Could my eyes be deceiving me? Conor McGregor is on foot. Holy camole! McGregor is coming up on the outside. He's really finding his stride.
You're none to me, chump. You understand that? I own you. I own this whole sport. Don't let him get into your head. Oh, no. It's too late. We suck.
Coming down the final furlong. Here comes McGregor. Pouring it on like a champ he is. Neck and neck, it's Ladybug. McGregor, Ladybug. And it's McGregor by a nose. The champ wins. Disqualified.
Are you blind?
There was no horse.
Conor McGregor doesn't need a horse. He's the greatest jockey on the planet.
Coach. You should take this time to apologize.
Apologize to who?
The absolutely nobody. Come on, buddy.
I can't believe you actually did that. You're amazing.
The world's greatest.
I worry you suffer from low self-esteem.
Oh, work on it.
Pegasus!
You're looking pretty good.
Thank you.
I was talking to the horse.
Thank you for enduring those all back to back. I'm sorry we didn't shorten them, but we did those, again, the audience in mind was a younger demographic. We ran those clips on all social media channels, Facebook, Instagram, and others, in the 4 weeks lead up to the race. And over that time, we got 31,000 new followers, which actually exceeded our expectations and industry standards. And we had 12 million plus views with an 82% completion rate. We earned $3 billion in earned global media impressions. So this exceeded our expectations too. So $3 billion included some of the properties, just to name a few: Daily Mail, CNN, Globo Brazil, Forbes, E Español, People Español, Vogue Latin America, Yahoo, Rolling Stone, Huffington Post, Irish Daily Mail, Esquire, Fox Sports Italy, Entertainment Tonight, and it went on and on. We actually had such a hard time tracking it. The ad value was estimated at close to $140 million, and the publicity value, $416 million. So clearly, we reached out. But as I mentioned, our challenge is to then continue that momentum and convert these media impressions, et cetera, into ongoing racing fans. But we're trying. And I should point out, while we're experimenting with different ways to reach out to that younger fan base, it doesn't mean that we're not serious about keeping the historic or the heritage aspects of racing as part of our plan. We respect that, we respect the tradition, but this is to build upon that and to reach out to a newer fan base. I'm looking at the time clock, which is coming to a close, but I'd like to say that, by concluding, that I am really optimistic about our future. If we work together as an industry to address the entire value chain and some of the things that I know that I'm confronted with on making decisions on, whether it be race day medication or a thoroughbred aftercare programs, and you are all very familiar with the range of those issues. I think the future looks really promising and looks great, and I'm very inspired by it. I'm very open. We are very open at the Stronach Group to working together with other people in this industry to make it better and to make it stronger for the future. And we're very open to doing that. And we hope that you'll join us at the Preakness tomorrow, and that if you have an opportunity to come to Pegasus for 2018, we learned a lot in 2017, what worked, what didn't work. I think overall we were very happy with the television viewership that we put forward, the broadcast we put forward, the attendance at the track, but we're about ongoing improvement, looking at how we can upgrade our facilities, upgrade that customer experience, doing it with integrity, reaching out to a newer fan base, and working together with all of you in the industry to make that happen. So thank you for having me today. There are many of you that have much more experience in this industry than I do. I'm kind of a newcomer to it in many ways, although I must admit, my parents and my father in particular, on weekends, instead of going and hanging with my girlfriends, he'd take me to the track and I'd go and eat a hot dog and drink a Coke and, do all that kind of stuff. And so I come by it honestly from a different perspective, but I'm very committed to this. I'm very committed to strengthening our sport and to reinvesting in all the racetracks and to make sure that we go forward together as a company and as an industry to really make this the sport of kings, but to also really broaden that reach and to modernize this last, great sporting legacy platform for the future. So thank you.
Thank you, Belinda. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Well done, Belinda. Well done.
Yeah.
Oh, I'll get to the gin. Don't worry.
Okay. I'm honored to introduce the organizer of the 2017 Pan American Conference. Estoy honorable de presentarle la organización del Pan American de 2017. Since the 2015 conference in New York City, they have worked tirelessly, and this conference you are being experienced and will enjoy this evening and tomorrow. Desde el 2015 han estado trabajando en forma incansable en esta conferencia en la cual ustedes han podido disfrutar de esta tarde y mañana.
Translated means have a good time tonight and tomorrow. And please welcome to our stage the President and Chief Operating Officer of the Jockey Club, Jim Gagliano. Hello, James. Good.
Wow, Belinda, Stronach, that was terrific. I know we're all looking forward to tomorrow, and we very much appreciate you making a very busy day for yourself and making your time to be here. So thanks again to everyone at the Stronach Group. And Tom and Luis, thank you very much for that introduction and for doing such a great job over the last 2 days. Let's give Tom and Luis a round of applause. Tom will be back up here in a minute to go over some of the important housekeeping matters and schedules for tonight and tomorrow. But first, I'd like to briefly take this opportunity to say some thank yous. And I'll start by thanking all of the presenters and panelists who participated in the IFAR conference on Wednesday and on Thursday morning. As an industry, we've taken several important steps and implemented numerous initiatives in recent years, but we can always do more. We cannot thrive as a sport or as an entertainment option if the general public and our fans believe we're not properly treating our equine athletes when they no longer are able to race or breed. So if you attended any of the IFAR sessions on Wednesday or Thursday, you were certainly reassured about the heartfelt commitment that those individuals that attended and organizations feel towards aftercare. Godolphin and Diana Cooper have done a tremendous job of shining the international spotlight on the issue of aftercare, and they are to be commended for that. In short, it was a great addition to our main program this week, and congratulations to all that participated. As for the Pan Am conference itself, I'd like to thank all of you who attended this conference, and in particular, our many sponsors. We appreciate the effort you made to get here, whether you live and work in neighboring states on the other side of our country or on another part of the world. You have been attentive and an enthusiastic audience, and we sincerely hope you've learned some things and that you've enjoyed yourself in doing so. From both a personal and a professional perspective, I want to thank our co-host, the Latin American Racing Channel. In planning these two Pan Am conferences over the past 2 years, we worked very closely with the staff members of the Jockey Club and LARC, and they now consider themselves not just colleagues or partners or friends, but truly family. They've been great every step of the way, and I'd like to acknowledge Horacio, Pablo, Esperanza, Mario, to please stand and take our thanks. You're terrific. Several members of my staff have also been working long hours for several months, and for some of you may feel like several years, to pull this conference together, and they deserve our thanks as well. Andrew Chesser, Shannon Kelly, Shannon Luce, Samantha Smith, please stand and be recognized. Thank you. We also rely heavily on our good friend and the very talented conference producer, director, wrangler, Julie Clear. She's in the back. Julie, great job. Thank you. But I want to save my biggest thanks for last. I'm sure in one way or another, all of you have had a chance to spend some time or hear from Nancy Kelly. Nancy has been taking care of every detail of this conference, sweating every aspect, dealing with the grief that I give her with late-minute cancellations, additions, and she's been a rock, and she does it with grace, and she has done that at the Jockey Club for 32 years. It's hard to believe. Later this year, Nancy will be retiring from the Jockey Club, and I wanted to take a moment and thank her for her incredible contributions to our organization, to horse racing in general, and certainly for this conference. Nancy, thank you. God bless. We love you. So we still have a big event tonight and a big day tomorrow, but I think when everything is over, we will all go home with a fresh perspective and a renewed appreciation for the global nature of our sport. As Stuart Janney mentioned yesterday morning in his welcome, we hope you'll continue to think about and consider the many initiatives you've heard about over the past 2 days. We're all trying to enhance the brand of thoroughbred racing and grow the sport, and you have all shown a commitment to that by attending this conference. With our thanks. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Thank you.
How could I lie?
Thank you.
Thank you.
And being a good friend of Nancy Kelly's, I can tell you that she's going to be a party girl tonight. She's going to have a good time because I've been closely observing her for the past few months, actually, and she's done a tremendous amount of work to pull this event together. So we're coming to the close of the convention, as you might have guessed. But I've got a couple things that I need to remind you of. First of all, get the tickets to go to the track. Ain't got no ticket, ain't getting in. And again, some applause for our sponsors that have really made this whole thing possible. It's very sponsor-driven. And again, as Jim mentioned, tonight's gala and the Longines Ladies Awards shuttles will be departing from the Hyatt Regency and here at the Grand Hyatt at 7:15 sharp, okay, 7:15 sharp. And tomorrow for the 142nd Preakness and its winner Always Dreaming, the shuttles will be departing from the Hyatt Regency and the Grand Hyatt at 10 a.m. sharp, okay, 10 a.m. sharp. Get there to grab the bus and move on up to Balmer. And I don't need to remind you to take your belongings with you because we're not coming back. And I would really like to thank my friend, my co-announcer, Luis Grandison, for doing such a great job here for the past couple days. Very good, Luis.
Muchas gracias.
Thank you very much. So if I might say in Spanish, adios y vaya con Dios.
Adiós, bendición, and blessing.